Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mumme, and today we have a new guest to the show, and her name is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. So for those of you that don't know Marsha, she is a 6-time best-selling author of When She Stopped Asking Why. She shares her lessons as a parent who dealt with teen substance abuse for past the level of normal experimentation. Through her programs, coaching, podcast, which is called Own Your Choices and Own Your Life, and live events for women, Marsha teaches the power of radical responsibility and owning your choices in your own life. She empowers women on how to own their stories and build platform businesses to impact, serve, and support others. So Marsha, without further ado, super excited to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Ben. I'm thrilled. I am thrilled to get started.
Awesome. Well, let's get kicking then. Super stoked to have you on. The first question I kind of want to ask you, Marsha, is if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up, and what inspired you, to become a best-selling author, speaker, and business coach, as well as podcaster?
Okay, so this is a really big question, but I will share. I grew up in the 70s. Yes, I dated myself, but I grew up in that time. And during those years, I watched my parents, we moved a couple times, but I watched my dad work himself through and become an entrepreneur. So, I was definitely surrounded by a lot of entrepreneurs from a young age. So I was always fascinated by that. And at the same time, I grew up in an era where we never talked about difficult things. Where it was actually very much frowned upon. We don't share our stories. We hide our struggles. We pretend like life is good. We put our smile on and we move forward. And that was almost given a badge of honor, of strength, if you could do that. So I had a really good badge of honor. That's literally how I lived, was this fake, push, be strong, don't show any emotion. And I did that for many years. And so when we hit a point in our life where we were dealing with teen substance abuse, it kind of came out of left field. It was nothing that I ever expected, didn't plan for. Nothing drastically happened in our lives. And it just became this beast that came into our life, and it just grew like a monster. So I spent a number of years trying to figure out how to work my full-time job. I was a registered kinesiologist. I was literally coaching people on movement, post-rehab, trying to help people through difficult times, and put a fake face on, come home, try and figure out how to fix, manage, control every aspect of my life, and also try and take care of myself at the same time. And obviously that's way too many things at once. And I didn't do a good job of it because it's not possible. And eventually, through a lot of support and counseling and work on myself, I got to a space of recognizing that my way was not working. It was just not working. I had to find a way to allow myself to heal, to take care of myself, to stop owning everyone else's choices. And through a lot of steps and work and time with a counselor and mentor who said, if you don't find a way to take care of yourself, you need to be a springboard if your kids ever come back. And right now you're a pile of quicksand. You couldn't do anything for anyone else. And as harsh as that is, that's exactly what I needed to hear, because I couldn't. That, coupled with being in a space of saying nobody is talking about difficult things in life. This was still 2014, 2015. And I was walking through some unbelievable situations, but we had to pretend like nothing was going on because everybody else was uncomfortable, right? We're in this space of we don't talk about these things. And eventually, it started with a really small talk with our school. The school, I had a very good relationship with them. They asked us if we could talk to other parents because they didn't know what to do and how to support parents. So I did. And that grew into a couple of other smaller talks. And eventually I got to a space of feeling like maybe I'm supposed to do something like this. I kind of fell into it, to be honest. And my counselor at the time said, maybe you're the person who is supposed to talk about it. And that seemed crazy. And at the same time, it was what if I am supposed to? And so it really started to move organically. And I started to find myself in a space of sharing not necessarily my story, but how do you navigate a difficult time? Like, how do you let go of control? How do you own your own choices and take responsibility for yourself? And eventually, over time, I had published 3 times, and I felt this call to write my own book, which, again, going back to the beginning of my story, disrupted a lot of people in my life because we don't talk about things. We don't share our stories. We don't do things like that. And the more I looked at it, I'm like, no, I think this is exactly what you're here to do. So I just kept moving forward, and it just kept growing. The platforms kept growing, the stage kept growing, the books kept growing. And I can't imagine doing anything other than what I get to do today. So that's really how, that's a big story, but that's really how it brought me to this point now.
Yeah. Well, Marsha, thank you really much, for sharing that story, and kind of like your journey and kind of what brought you to where you are today. And I think, that took a lot of courage, especially if you were from an environment that, was, how to say, maybe putting that iceberg effect on where you only see like the 10% above the water, like that
Mhm.
analogy. But really there's so much more below. Right. And, I applaud you on, being motivated, to navigate and try and see how you could, as not only as a parent, but even as a person like yourself, for your own well-being, fill the cup and kind of figure out how you have to navigate to self-improve, and realize, what can you control and also what you cannot. So yeah, just a lot there to comment on that. And I think something that I want to transition to, from your story, and I think it's something that you're definitely big on, is, radical responsibility, right? And I know that was a big part of kind of like your journey as well. So, a question I have for you is like, why does this matter, and what does this word mean to you?
Hmm. I feel like that word is such an anchor in my life, because when I was in the space of, change started happening, I had to come, like, I didn't realize the power of my thoughts and the power of my emotions and the power of my words. And when you're really stuck in a difficult story, like, your words, they're driving you at all times. So I was saying those words, like, I was stuck. It's not my fault. I can't fix this. And no solutions come in that space. So I had to find ways to start to change my language. And during those years, I listened to a lot of YouTube videos and podcasts because that was what was available. And a lot of Tony Robbins work came in at that time, and starting to understand, like, the reason I felt so stuck was because that's the word I used thousands of times a day. And so I really started to look and go, okay, how can I change this? And the two things that came up for me was, like, what is my choice and what's not my choice? And the word choice became such a pivotal part in my life, is recognizing that, almost taking an inventory and an awareness of how I spent my entire day and energy owning everyone else's choice, yet still being so angry that I had no time left for me, because the thought of putting myself first made absolutely no sense. I couldn't get through that idea of it. And the other was radical responsibility. And the more I started to understand radical responsibility is like taking full responsibility for every single decision that I make. And that's where change starts from, in my opinion. We can have awareness of what has to change, but we also have to be in a space of taking radical responsibility for our choices, our decisions, our actions, our thoughts, everything that we're doing all day long. I think where we run into trouble as humans, and I did this, and I can still do it quite easily, is we're having the awareness that something isn't working, then deciding that, okay, radical responsibility, I can take responsibility for my choice. But in the space there before action starts, most humans were like, why am I here again? I made this mistake. I can't do this. This is the I can't make this change, like shaming ourselves, judging ourselves, criticizing ourselves, which only keeps ourselves stuck there. And so there's a really beautiful thing that happens when you do take radical responsibility for yourself, because you can recognize that you're in exactly the position that you need to be, and your choices have brought you here. And so instead of shaming ourselves, looking at it and going, all right, if my decisions and my choices and my thoughts and my behaviors brought me here, then they can also take me somewhere else. Like, that becomes empowering, that I can make those choices and make a different decision, which is going to move me somewhere else. So at this point in my life, I will tell you with full transparency that every day the words radical responsibility still come into place. Like when I find myself in a space of anger, frustration, judging, criticizing myself, feeling like a victim, being in a space of blame, I immediately, it's like, where are you not taking radical responsibility for yourself, Marsha? Like it's time to own that. And I stop and I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, my boundaries aren't good. My personal choices aren't good. I mean, they're not in alignment with what I say I want. And I think that's a big thing. We all talk a lot about what we want, but do our actions and our decisions and our thoughts line up to that? And that is where radical responsibility comes into place. So it's like a major pillar in my life.
I love that. Well, you know what? Thanks for, breaking that down. From what I understand, radical responsibility, it gives you like the power, right? To essentially, take control of your decisions rather than, playing the blame game, right? Whether that's blaming others or even making excuses, right? So that self-awareness kind of aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And, something that I think, Marsha, like I also believe like taking radical responsibility, for your life is actually really hard. It's definitely not easy. But resisting the responsibility is actually even harder.
Yes.
So a question I have for you is, how can someone who's tuning in right now move beyond blame, fearlessly live their highest purpose, and become an unstoppable force for good?
Oh, wow. That is such a great question and a big question. I think the first thing you have to look at is like, look at where you're sitting in blame. Okay. Look at it and be very honest with yourself about where you're sitting in blame. Because there was a pivotal quote for me in the early journey, and it was Stephen Covey. It's right. You're not a product of your circumstances. You're a product of your decisions. There's a lot of people in this world who have walked through unbelievable circumstances and are doing incredible things. So there's a lot of evidence. If you want to look for it, you'll find it. So wherever you're sitting in blame, blame is on the opposite end of ownership. Okay. So that's your sign. That's a sign of like, okay, wait, what am I doing here? And then we're going to take that story and start to break it down. Like, yes, what did happen to you? There's a lot of really good people in this world who experienced unbelievable circumstances. So it's not about being good or bad as a person. It's making that story neutral. Yes, that happened to me. Yes, this is something I experienced. And then what I like to take people through is look at, how did I respond to that? How did I show up after that? What did that story help me become more of or stop me from becoming? And so we take people through a little bit of a, I would say like almost like a storytelling framework. And it's looking at like who I am today is exactly a result of every single thing I've walked through. So if I'm going to hate every single circumstance that I walked through, in a nutshell, I ultimately hate myself. So how am I ever going to create change if that's the lens that I have? And instead, we start to look at it and go, what I've walked through has shaped me into who I am today. So now we start to look at that story differently. That requires that somebody is willing to look at that story differently. I know that's not easy to do. I'm never, ever promising that that's easy to do. But I can tell you within seconds of a phone call with somebody if they're in that space or not. There's no judgment. It's just if they're coming in as I want to prove to you why my life is the way it is because of everybody else. That's a victim mentality. I spent years in victim mentality. So I don't judge it, but I can recognize it really fast. And I can promise you no change happens there. None at all. You'll stay exactly in that space. So being able to shift from that into saying, okay, I am who I am today because of what I walked through. How can I change the lens? How can I look at that differently? And what if that has actually set me up perfectly for what I'm here to do? Because I actually, getting a little bit spiritual, a little bit philosophical for a second, I think we all come here with a very unique set of gifts and skills and abilities. And I think that we walk through challenges to fine tune those skills and to fine tune those abilities and to grow our strengths in those areas. So as we do that, we start to shift and shape and see the story differently. And when that seed was planted for me, that what if you could do something good with this? That became the direction that I wanted to follow. It was like, I wanted to, like, what would it feel like to be able to do something good with this story? Okay, well, I don't have a clue how to do that. I don't know how to share a story authentically and keep everyone in integrity, but I could learn. And it's like, what skills can I learn to do this differently? And that's what happened. And as that started to change, the story started to shape. And so eventually it became a space of going, what do I want to do with this? How do I want this to look? And it's not about, it doesn't change the story. It changes you as a person. And as you do that, you start to become the person who can do this. Because I could never be that person who was in that victim mindset, could never do what I'm doing today. I had to change as a person in order to become this version. And there's a lot of steps in between, but it really starts with letting go of that victim mentality, taking that ownership and starting to see that story differently. Not just the story, the skills that I have learned because of it. And then how can I do something different with that to impact others? So we all have that. Like, we all have this very unique set of skills that we are here learning, growing, refining. And how we're doing that is through the experiences that we're living.
I love that. Well, I appreciate that answer. But something that I do want to kind of challenge here is, what about if you're someone that you're really good at taking ownership, right? You're someone, you have great accountability. You know, you were just talking about skill sets at like the end there. That's a great quality to have as a person. But sometimes it can be hard then because we're really hard on ourselves, right? And I know I'm someone that could relate to this a lot, whether it was in a past relationship, you know, when it's over and you're looking at all the things that you did wrong, where you're not actually blaming in terms of like the victim mentality. You're actually being really hard on yourself, right? And you're having trouble letting go, right? Or another example could be, you know, even when I used to be a high level athlete, you know, taking all ownership for like the team, which again is a great quality as a captain, but again could also be on the other side a weakness as well, right?
Mhm.
So what advice would you give on the flip side of someone that is already good at taking a lot of ownership, who's tuning in right now, but maybe needs help um finding help of like support? Like what exactly would you recommend?
Well, I can relate to this question really well because I've literally been the one who's the strong one. I can do it on my own. I don't need to ask for help and I can figure it out on my own. And I swear those skills brought me here. Like, they were great skills. Like, they did help, like you're saying, they definitely made an impact. But I think there comes a point where our strengths become our weaknesses and we have to recognize that, wait, this is not actually working. And so I think that in a roundabout way, I think when we get to that point, we have to recognize that, like what is working and what's not. Again, honesty, having those moments of honesty with ourselves. And those strengths got you here, but they're not going to take you to the next space. So what skills do you need to learn in order to move forward? And that required me being in a space of asking for a lot of help, like really asking for a lot of help. I put myself into groups, into support groups, into containers. Mentors became huge for me at that point because I had to start seeing my blind spots differently. I couldn't see my blind spots. We don't see our blind spots. We don't. And I think that being our own biggest critic, that's like, there's so many of us overachievers who've lived that our whole life. And if I could just pause that part for 1 second, most people are so afraid of what everyone else is going to think or say about them, when I actually think that's a big fat lie, to be totally honest. It's what we say to ourselves that matters. It's like, because we are our own biggest critic at all times. We're already saying the worst things to ourselves. So I had to get really honest about what I was doing, how I was treating myself, how I was like speaking to myself. I really started to dive into NLP at that time. So neuro-linguistic programming, understanding my thoughts, understanding my own programming, like how had I got to hear again, the skills that I needed to survive many years weren't helping me now. So it's like, all right, how can I do this differently? And so I really started to get some help from other people. So it does require that. It does require surrounding yourself with people who can help you to see those spots. It requires you be in a space of being open to receiving coaching, mentoring, and recognizing that there's a different way to do things. And it requires a tremendous amount of practice, because I can honestly say some of those skills, even though I started sharing my story probably 8-9 years ago, some of those skills I didn't learn until the last 3 or 4 years. And I didn't realize how much I have been trying to do it all on my own and being my biggest critic. So I've come to a space of recognizing that it might sound woo-woo for some people, but learning like grace, compassion, self-care, awareness, slowing down, stop pushing myself to burnout. Those skills I'm just learning now. And I've needed them for years, but they've taken time to, and practice and repetition, way more repetition than I don't think I could ever put into words. So it takes a lot of practice, a lot of help, a lot of support. And again, the willingness to want to do it differently, like the willingness to want to do it differently without shaming and criticizing yourself even more, because that doesn't change the story, right? Like we spend so much time shaming ourselves, and all we're doing with shame, like shame, if you understand really what shame is taking your voice away. It is keeping you exactly in the space that you're in right now. It is making you less relatable. It is making you less able to make connection with others. It is blocking you from belonging in the containers and with the groups that you're meant to be with. So all of the things that you're craving, you're stopping yourself with. So it requires a real brutal honesty and the willingness to create change with that. So once you start to do that, you're going to start to build some evidence that, wait, this is actually working. And I remember the first time I jumped into a Facebook group for moms dealing with teen substance abuse. And my first time in there was 100,000 moms. And I will never forget that moment of like, what in the world is happening? How is there 100,000 moms here, but nobody wants to talk about it? That started to really open up that this is a problem. Shame is a problem. And that started to build my confidence a little bit more. The very first little talk that I gave, build evidence that there was a little bit more confidence that I had. The number of moms that came up to me and said, that's my problem too. Wait, there's more of us. Okay, that builds some evidence and confidence. So we've got to allow ourselves time to build some evidence and confidence in the direction that we're moving in. And again, going back to that ownership piece and taking responsibility for the decisions that we're making, because a really simple question to ask yourself is, like, every decision I make is going to move me closer to or further away from where I want to go. And so if I want something different, you have to be willing to make some different choices.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think you nailed it in terms of talking about dealing with shame, especially in terms of someone who takes a lot of ownership. Important to realize to ask for help and to surrender is probably the best thing that you can do. And to remind yourself that we make mistakes. We're human, right? So having that human approach and kind of realizing that just like the way that you would treat anyone else, you should treat yourself, right?
That's a tough one for people to learn. And I 100% agree. I often think, like, would I ever talk to anyone else the way I was talking to myself? Not a chance. Would I let someone else talk to me the way I was talking to myself? Not a chance. So well, this is obviously not working. Like, it was just this moment of realization that this wasn't working. And if I can just add one small thing there that I want to share is, like, when I talked about shame, the thing with shame is that the second you give something a voice, shame can't survive. It just doesn't survive. And so the second you start to share something and allow yourself to be seen, shame can't survive. And so it starts to go away. And once that starts to happen, you can start to see your own worth differently. Like, I started to feel like, okay, wait, I didn't fail at life. Like, I thought I failed at everything. Whereas people looking in from the outside in are like, oh my God, you're doing amazing. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like I failed at every aspect of my life. So I had to see it differently. And I had to allow myself to receive support. And that was probably one of the hardest lessons I have ever walked through, is allowing myself to receive it. But when you start to allow yourself to receive it, you start to believe that you're worth more. When you believe that you're worth more, you will allow yourself to receive more. And again, people say all to me all the time, but I don't have people in my life. Yeah, I didn't either. I literally had to burn every single bridge in my life and put massive boundaries in place so that if somebody wasn't adding to my worth, myself, my belief in myself, they didn't get a seat at the table. They literally didn't. And it's just the only way I could do it. I didn't know it. I was just trying to survive, but that was critical. So that meant family didn't get a space, like immediate friends didn't get a space. If it wasn't helping me to make it through one more day, then no, you didn't get a space. And so eventually those boundaries, it was like, oh, wow, I needed those. I didn't realize how much I needed those. You start to then like rise to a point where it's like, okay, I can do this. You start to build that belief and you start to be very clear of like who gets access to you. And because you're valuing yourself. And when you value yourself, all of those things that we just talked about start to change again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm happy that you pinpointed boundaries as well. Just because that's something that I think with anything, no matter what you're going through, you always need to be able to fill your cup, right? And I had said that earlier on, right? And if you want to be your best version, not just to you, but even to others, you need that cup filled, right? So setting boundaries is key. And something that I've said a lot on this podcast is I really believe that you are the average of, the top 5 people that you spend time with,
Mhm.
right? So it is important to kind of protect that, in terms of for yourself, because your time is valuable. And, something that I'm curious to ask you is, I know you have experience not just helping yourself, but also helping many other people, right? Through coaching and, teaching people about adversity and how to overcome it so they could, grow and, change like their lives, right? So for the benefit of my listeners, what mental fitness tools can help someone build confidence, clarity, courage when they're dealing with tough situations?
I think that I love this question, mental fitness tools, and I want everyone to visualize that they have a toolbox. Like you are literally carrying, you're the toolbox, but you're literally carrying this toolbox. And get curious about what can you add to that toolbox? What makes you feel better, more confident, more energetic, more grounded, and add it in. And it's like I just kept doing inventory. So it's like what can that be? And for me it was like, certain podcasts every day. It was books, it was journaling, it was connecting, it was speaking with friends who helped me to move it forward. When I was in victim mindset, every time I talked to friends, all we did was just bitch about our situation. Obviously nothing like that was not helping anyone's toolbox. And so I started to recognize, like, how can I connect with people who also want to move forward and be in that space? So it was continuously building the toolbox. And those are great tools, like, health and fitness, time outside, my nutrition, exercise, how was I resting, how was I sleeping, all of those things added to the toolbox. And then I started to get really curious about mindset and subconscious reprogramming and NLP, like neuro linguistic programming. Like, what were my thoughts? What were they saying? What were they doing? And so I started to really do some work in understanding how hypnosis could help my subconscious reprogramming. Listening to subliminals was helping me. Working through some different tools and techniques for healing, because again, I just pushed through. So it was like, if I push through, then I'm okay. And I can ignore that that's still a factor. And no, you can't. You actually do need to work through some of those experiences. And so the toolbox also included a lot of those tools, EFT tapping, counseling, support, and get really curious. And when you try something, ask yourself after, how do I feel with that? How does that feel? Okay, well, actually, I feel better. So let's add that in the toolbox. And I don't want you to think of there's a lot of people talk about, and I love Robin Sharma, he's one of my favorites, but this 5 a.m. rule that you have to do this for 15 minutes, this for 15 minutes, this for 15 minutes, because then we're also creating this feeling that if I'm not doing it like the gurus say, then I'm failing. And I don't like that, because I think that we're all human beings in this space of build your toolbox, have an extensive amount of things that you can pull from it, and get curious, because there are some days I'm very regimented with what I do. But there are some days I wake up and I'm like, I feel amazing today. And I could just bang out so much work. The next day, I've done everything the same. I've ate the same, I've slept the same. And I'm like, man, I hope I make it through today. Like, I don't even understand what's wrong today. Guess what? I need more tools on that day. And if I can just share one thing about the cup and the saucer that Lisa Nichols said, I heard 7 years ago when I heard her speak on stage. And it's changed my whole mindset on self-care. We're trying to fill our cup. Actually, some people were very angry that our cup is empty and we are waiting for someone else to fill it. Like, that's another sign that we're in the wrong headspace. But the cup and the saucer, our job is to fill the cup. The cup overflows to the saucer. The saucer is what we serve others from. We don't serve others from our cup. We serve them from our saucer. And you can do a banging job of filling that cup today, and tomorrow the cup is empty again. So it's still your job to keep doing it. It's not like you do it once and it's good. So every day I just come back into that space of ownership. It's like, where's my cup today? I'm like, you know what? I need to move today, but today is going to be a yoga day. I just don't have the same amount of energy. Or today requires a longer breathwork session and some meditation because I'm tired and I'm feeling it. Or today feels like, oh, I feel amazing. I'm going to do a great weight workout today. So meet yourself where you're at instead of judging yourself for where you're not.
I love that. I love the fact that, you shared a lot of tools. You also made it very clear that there's no one size fits all mentality. Yeah, you could have, rituals or habits or routines, but I think, again, goes to what we said before, you still have to be human, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have that human approach to yourself, and not only to others, but yourself as well. But yeah, it was interesting to hear about all the different tools that you have. I look at it the same way when it comes to mental fitness and physical fitness. It's so crucial that even for physical fitness, there's thousands of activities we could do to move and be physically healthy. Same thing for mental fitness, right? So even if there's a tool that works for you, it might not work for me, and that's okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so figuring out what works for you and also what feels right for you, depending on the time or the day or whatever. Something that I want to move to, Marsha, I'm curious to ask you, you have a lot of wisdom, you have a lot of insights. I know you're very self-motivated to keep learning and growing every day. What is one favorite quote that you live by?
I have so many, and I am just going to just trust my gut right now that people have to earn the right to hear your story. Like, you don't have to share your story. That's a Brene Brown. I've got a dozen Brene Brown quotes, but that's one. If I could actually, I'm going to tweak that even more. Is that like, who's in the arena with you, right? So we talk about the arena all the time. Brene mentions it all the time, and the sense that, who are you taking advice from? Because we're Canadian, arenas are really big. People sit in the 500 seats. They might be in the arena, but they're spitting down advice from you, and they're not willing to walk in your shoes, not willing to walk alongside you. And you're taking their advice and letting that dictate what you do. I just keep it really simple. Like, if you're not on the arena floor with me, then no, thank you. I'm not interested. And I've actually said that to people, like, I didn't ask, I'm not interested in your, like, I'm just not. And so if you're not willing to walk alongside me, then I'm not willing to take the advice. So people have to earn the right to hear your story, right? Not everybody has earned the right to hear your story. And when people say, you share so much, you're very vulnerable, it might look like that, but there are parts of my story that only my very, very close friends know, and they will never make anywhere, social media, podcast, book, because they don't serve a purpose. right? Not everything has to be shared. And it really is only amongst the people who have earned the right to hear it.
I gotcha. Well, that's obviously a lovely quote. There's one thing though that I want to ask, because you touch upon, storytelling and kind of like knowing when to share your story. Someone's tuning in right now and they're like, "Hey, Marsha, how do I know when I can trust someone that's, in or outside of my arena, or, someone that I like, how can someone trust when it feels right or when it is right to share their story?" Because being vulnerable could also be very hard, even though it could also be super rewarding.
And that is a great question. And I'm going to be so honest with you and say that you're probably going to get it wrong more than you're going to get it right. Like, just let me just give you that grace and knowing. In the beginning, the people that I shared my story with, I mean, we were living in a trauma that I would not wish on anyone. And I remember sharing it with friends saying, like, I don't know what to do. I actually don't know what to do. Only to turn around the next day and find out all those details have been spread, talked about, shared. And it was like, it hurts, right? It really hurts, because it's like I'm in my lowest spot and you're glorifying that. And so I got it wrong more than I got it right in the beginning. And when I think about it, like, think of who is somebody that you could connect with, that is not in a space of judgment or criticism. And if you don't have those people, maybe you haven't met them yet. It's not that they don't exist. Maybe you haven't met them yet. Because when I look at the people I have now, I didn't have them in my life then. So that also means you're probably going to get it wrong first. So just some grace there. You're going to work on yourself. You're going to put some boundaries in place. You're going to start to understand, like, what do you need? What do you need support with? Then you'll try it again and you'll be like, oh, well, this is a person. So I have a number of friends in my life right now that, if they phoned me and said, could you help me with something? I just need an ear. They're not looking for me to sit and complain about where life is at. They are asking for support. And I think the thing is as humans, we try and jump in with giving all the answers. There's a lot of power in just saying, yeah, I'm an ear for you. How can I hold space for you today? I hear you. I hear you. And how can I help you move forward with that? Do you feel better by sharing that? Is there anything else I can do to support you? When you start, I still believe, like, when you get in that space of you valuing yourself enough that that's who gets access to you, that you start to be in a space of sharing, it gets easier to figure out who that is. And it doesn't have to be a lot of people. If I take it back to what you said earlier, some of the 5 people that you spend your time with. I mean, I probably have 5 people in my life right now that I could have that conversation with, probably a little bit more, but 5 for sure that I could have that conversation with. And it takes time to build to that. Does that answer your question?
Totally does. I appreciate that answer. And something that I want to move to, that I ask every guest on my show. But I'm excited to ask this one because you even talked before about the fact that, some days you don't always have to be great. Some days it's okay to be good, or some days it's okay to even be bad, or whatever. But the question I'm going to ask is, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire millions of people across the world, to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. So what is your definition of greatness?
God, that's such a great question. Honestly, I think that greatness is working on yourself every single day with love, compassion, grace, meeting yourself where you're at, and moving in a direction that you're here owning, using every single gift that you have so that you live your life with no regrets. So when you come to the end, it's not in a space of like, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have tried. I wish I would have done, but I was afraid. It's like moving past those things so that you can say, like, I played full out. I played full out. That's literally one of the biggest things that I want to do here, is to say, like, I played full out and showed others what is possible. That to me is greatness and leadership, but it starts with leading yourself first. It literally does. You can't lead anyone else if you can't lead yourself first. And if I want to share one thing you mentioned about, good days, bad days, find ways with your language to become more neutral, not you, but everyone, is I had to come to a space of stop saying like, why am I having many bad days? So I just call them off days now. They're just off days. And an off day means I'm being asked to listen more to what do I need to lead myself. And if I'm having an off day, chances are good I didn't use enough tools for my toolbox. I didn't give myself enough grace. I tried to put too much into my schedule. How can I have the awareness to take inventory and lead myself differently the next day? So I think greatness is learning and building that relationship with yourself to lead yourself so that you can actually play full out with the gifts that you are here to use, because someone is always, 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 always praying for the solutions that you're holding on to. You get to decide if you can become the person who can own those gifts and make that difference in the world.
I love that. Well, that's a very powerful answer. Love the definition. What I got out of that is, living your true potential, and doing it authentically, right?
Mhm.
Really, really understanding yourself and equipping yourself with the tools or practices, right? To really know how to thrive, right? So I really, really appreciate that definition. And a question that I want to move to is, now that you have a good feel of my podcast, and kind of what it's all about, who is a future guest, someone that you know personally that you would want to see on this show?
Ooh, great question. Oh, I have so many. One of my good friends, and I will shout her out, Megan Weir. We've kind of walked through a lot of our training together, a lot of our NLP training together. She's a fantastic host and of the podcast called Dropped In. And she is somebody who is really out there changing the narrative and story of what we call healing and like owning your gifts. And she has always said something that resonates with me is that, let me just get this right. Soul leads, body calibrates, mind follows. As humans, we tend to lead with our mind, and it's actually not what we should be leading with, because our mind, our brain is literally made up of everything that's happened up until now, all the past, right? The brain doesn't see the future. It's made up of everything from the past. And so that's one of the biggest things she said to me that's always landed. I think she'd be a fantastic guest.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I take you up on that challenge.
Yeah.
I would love to make another meaningful conversation and share her gift.
Mhm.
And Marsha, before we go or end off today's episode, where is the best place, for my viewers or listeners to go to either read about your work or see your work or follow your work? Where's the best place for them to go?
I think I'm most consistent between Instagram and TikTok, which I never thought I would say that, but I actually do quite like the platforms. And it's everything I've done social media wise and website are all under Marsha Van W, because my name is really long and it's just easier for people if I do it that way. But it's Marsha Van W, and you can find me in any of those spaces. That also links to my podcast, Own Your Choices, Own Your Life, which we're just under episode 600 right now. So there's a lot of incredible stories of people who have really walked through challenges and are here to make a difference. So anywhere online there. And if you're still not sure, you just go to Google and start typing Marsha Van W, and almost everything that pops up is me. Pleasure of a long name.
I will make sure to put that in the podcast notes or the YouTube notes. That way everyone knows where to go. It'll be a simple, quick click. And, Marsha, I want to take this last moment, to really, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your stories, your wisdom, your insights. And is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
First off, I just want to say thank you so much, Ben. Honestly, you can tell you prepared, and I love it. The questions were fantastic. I hope it served your listeners and audience well. And I just think the last thing I want to share is that what if everything you're walking through is preparing you for what you're here to do? Like when you change the lens of how you look at things, things change, and it's all possible. So I just wanted to share that.
I love that. Well, I think we're going to end there. That's powerful thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you.